What if, suddenly, you found yourself standing before your entire family, even those who are no longer here? What if, in a single instant, 3 generations of your history gathered before your eyes, with smiles, welcoming looks, vivid memories, but among them all, there was only one face that remained serious, motionless, unsmiling? This is one of those experiences that can't be explained with logic alone, but which touches you right to the core of your soul. And as much as it sounds like something out of a movie, that's exactly what happened to me. It all began unexpectedly, as many true spiritual experiences do. It was a moment of inner searching, of pent-up longing, of questions that seemed unanswerable. Perhaps you've felt this too. That silent longing to feel the presence of the departed again, to receive a sign, to hear, even if only for a moment, that all is well on the other side. And it was when I least expected it that it happened. The setting was indescribable, a place that doesn't exist here, but that seemed more real than any childhood memory. A light, almost floating atmosphere, filled with a soft light that didn't come from any sun. And there they were, my grandparents, my parents, a beloved uncle, a warmth that wasn't physical but enveloped my heart. They smiled as if welcoming, as if waiting for me. But there was something, or rather someone, who wasn't like the others. A family member, visibly present, wasn't smiling, wasn't speaking, just staring, and that gaze had a weight, a different energy, as if it said more than any words could express, as if hiding a secret, a request, or perhaps a warning. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because the answer to that silence, the reason behind that single unsmiling face, turned out to reveal much more than I imagined. In that moment, as everyone smiled around me and an almost sacred silence filled the air, my heart was torn between the comfort of that familiar presence and the discomfort of that still gaze. It was as if time had stopped just so I could see it. And it's curious how in these spiritual experiences, no matter how brief, everything seems amplified. The feelings, the memories, the details. And it was in that silent whirlwind that I understood. Some connections aren't broken by death. They just change form. Maybe you've experienced something similar. A dream, a presence, a sign that made you stop and think that wasn't normal. And if it touched you in any way, comment here about your experience. Sometimes, what you experienced can help others understand what they're feeling too. Creating this space here in the comments is more than opening a dialogue. It's building a community where faith, spirituality, and the inexplicable are given a voice. And if this content has touched some part of your heart, leave a like, because that really helps the video reach those who also need to hear this message. And if you feel that these stories resonate with you, that they connect you, strengthen you, or simply make you see life differently, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is crucial for this channel to grow and reach more people with this kind of content that touches the soul, respects the invisible, and somehow shines a light where before there was only doubt. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happened after that silent encounter revealed a truth I never imagined I would carry with me. That week, nothing seemed to fit right. The days passed as if they'd lost their weight, and I carried a silent restlessness I couldn't explain. It wasn't pain exactly, but a strange absence, as if something was calling me from within, asking to be heard. Sometimes, life pushes us to pause, and even if everything seems fine on the outside, inside there's a subtle noise, almost like a whisper from another plane. That's how I felt. I remember that on that particular day, I woke up earlier than usual, but for no clear reason. I simply opened my eyes with the feeling that something was about to happen. I sat on the edge of the bed and remained there, silent, unhurried, without distractions, as if an invisible force was telling me, "Be still, listen," and that's what I did. I listened to the silence. This pause brought back an old, almost forgotten feeling, a longing that came not with tears, but with presence, a memory both good and bitter at the same time. That feeling of being with someone who's gone, even if you can't see it. It was as if my soul was being prepared for something, not in a start, but gently, as if someone on the other side knew I was ready. And that's when we understand. Often, the spiritual doesn't arrive with fanfare. It approaches as if respecting space, as if waiting for us to be willing to feel. And that morning, I was. Not by choice, but by necessity. It was as if I were being led to something greater than I could comprehend at that moment. And it's curious how the invisible knows exactly when to touch us. Not before, not after. At the exact moment we are vulnerable, yet open. That's when everything began to change. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because what came after this inexplicable sensation not only brought me answers, but also revealed a side of spirituality that I had never seen until then. It was as if I had been transported, without warning, to a space outside of time. There was no sound of cars, no ticking of the clock, not even my own breathing, just a living silence, the kind that doesn't frighten, but rather welcomes. A vast field stretched out before me, bathed in a light that had no source but filled everything with an indescribable peace. It was a golden, soft light that didn't hurt the eyes. It seemed to touch the skin like a warm embrace. No shadows, no dark corners. Everything there vibrated with a kind of harmony we don't find in the material world. On the ground, the grass was incredibly green, with tiny flowers slowly opening, as if they were waking up with me. The air was light, clean, as if my lungs needed no effort. I looked around and felt that, despite the immensity of the place, there was no solitude. Quite the opposite. It felt like home, even without recognizing the setting. Suddenly, I noticed people in the distance. They were approaching, one by one, with smiles on their faces. It was as if my heart knew who they were before my eyes confirmed it. My grandfather, who passed away when I was a child, came first. He didn't say anything, but his gaze was full of pride. My grandmother was right behind him, with that way she always had of tucking her hair behind her ear. My uncles, a great-grandmother I only knew from old photos. They were all there, as if summoned for this reunion, and each one brought a unique energy, not only because of the blood bond, but because of the memory each one left in me. But there was something curious about that atmosphere, something that made me realize that not everything there was just celebration or nostalgia. Among all those smiling faces, there was one that wasn't smiling. A man, standing a little further back, watched me with eyes that seemed to speak 1,000 words. He wasn't sad nor angry, but there was a seriousness in his face that completely clashed with the lightness around him. And it was at that moment that everything inside me fell silent. I knew it wasn't for nothing, that detail was a key, a revelation hidden among the smiles and lights. And even without fully understanding, my heart prepared for what that look had to say. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when a presence deviates from the norm in an environment of pure light, it is because something essential is hidden there, perhaps a request, perhaps a forgotten truth, perhaps a link that still needs healing. Everyone was so alive that it was hard to accept that this was a spiritual encounter. They seemed to breathe, laugh, and exchange glances like at a family Sunday lunch. But something told me this place didn't belong here. Before me, framed by that soft light that seemed to emanate from within them, stood 3 generations of my history. My grandparents, who left this world more than 2 decades ago, appeared looking exactly the same as in the old photos I keep in my memory box. My grandmother wore the same blue cotton dress with pale flowers, the same one she wore the last time I saw her. Her hair tied in a low bun, her eyes small and sweet. Her wide smile seemed to encompass everything around her. Beside her, my grandfather watched me with that typical expression of someone who didn't need to say anything. Just being there said it all. Right behind them were my parents. My father smiled with the same sparkle in his eyes as when I was a child, and I ran toward him asking to be held. He was wearing his favorite striped shirt, his hands clasped behind his back, as if guarding the secrets of time. My mother, my mother. She held something small in her hands, an unfinished piece of embroidery, perhaps, and her eyes, upon seeing me, filled with an emotion that only those who love with all their soul can express without words. She didn't need to say anything. The embrace she gave me with her eyes was enough. On the opposite side, almost in a circle, were my siblings. I saw my older sister, who had passed away at a young age. She looked exactly as she did in her graduation photos, in a flowing white dress, her loose hair dancing in the invisible breeze of that space. My younger brother was there too, though I'd never met him in life. He'd passed away before I was born, and yet, there he was, with features that somehow seemed familiar, a silent recognition between souls who had been searching for each other for too long. What struck me was the atmosphere. It was welcoming, with a calm that bordered on the sacred. The smiles weren't exaggerated or loud, but carried a lightness that's only possible when love has overcome longing. Every presence seemed to say, "It's okay, we're here." There was no heaviness, no hurt, no unanswered questions. Just a moment when everything made sense, even if I couldn't explain how or why. But there was that one detail that wouldn't leave me. While everyone shared this atmosphere of reunion, light, and peace, a figure remained motionless, distant, as if carrying a silence of its own. This contrasted sharply with the others, like a dissonant chord amidst a harmonious melody. And it was this presence that began to draw my attention, as if it were waiting for something, perhaps a gesture from me, perhaps an unspoken word, perhaps an unreleased forgiveness. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because it is in the subtleties, in the almost invisible details, that the great spiritual messages tend to hide. And it was there that everything began to reveal itself. And it was at that moment that something inside me began to stir. As if amidst that scene so charged with love and spiritual presence, there was a loose thread, a detail the heart recognizes even before the mind comprehends it. Among all those familiar faces, among all the smiles that seemed to tenderly sew the threads of eternity, there was a gaze that transfixed me. It was him, an older man sitting a little further back, silently. He wasn't smiling, he didn't seem sad, but he also didn't emanate the same light as the others. It was as if he were there, and yet not there at the same time. Time, which had previously seemed suspended in that space, began to flow differently, as if that silent detail had activated some kind of hidden truth within that spiritual vision. My body, even in that state of profound peace, reacted. A subtle, almost imperceptible uneasiness took hold of my chest. You know when you feel something isn't right, even without a word being spoken? This was it. The discomfort didn't stem from fear nor from rejection, but from the clear sensation that that gaze carried a weight that needed to be understood. While the others watched me with evident love, that man kept his eyes fixed on me, but with an expression that seemed to be asking for something. It wasn't anger, it wasn't judgment. It was an absence of a smile that said much more than any words could. I tried to remember who he was. The face didn't seem strange to me, but there was a subtle veil covering the memory, as if my spirit knew, but my consciousness hadn't yet accessed it. And the more I searched, the more the atmosphere around me changed. That emotional contrast between light and shadow, between laughter and silence, began to show me that this encounter wasn't just about reunion and comfort. It was also about revelations, about truths that had yet to be told. And it was then that a question formed in my mind with an almost painful clarity. Why didn't he smile? That simple doubt spiraled into a spiral of emotions. Was there pain there? A mistake from the past? Something unresolved between us? Or perhaps something he was still waiting to hear? And what's more, was he stuck in it, waiting for forgiveness or permission to move on? The feeling was this, that there was an unfinished connection, an unfinished story between that soul and mine. A backstory of my own family lineage that had never surfaced in words, but now revealed itself on this subtle plane where only essence matters. It was as if that look told me, you need to remember, you need to understand. And that, more than anything, pierced me in a way I never could have imagined. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what I discovered later, as I reflected on this moment and connected dots that previously seemed disconnected, was what truly transformed the way I view inherited pain and what it means to heal a story from the inside out. Time there seemed suspended, as if the air itself had stopped circulating. Even sounds lost their clarity. No noise, no breeze, not even the sound of my own thoughts. It was as if everything was being observed by something greater, by a consciousness that didn't judge, but also didn't need to say anything to be deeply felt. That person's gaze, the only one among all that didn't smile, cut through the room like a whisper laden with something I couldn't yet decipher. There was no anger, nor was there fear, but there was a kind of silent demand, as if that presence were gripped by something that couldn't be expressed in life, or something that, even on this plane, still weighed heavily. As others welcomed me with smiles and warmth, faces I loved, full of light and peace, that gaze pierced me with unspoken questions. It was as if, faced with such a strong spiritual connection, I had been called not only to be comforted, but also to understand, to receive, yes, but also to realize what still needed to be transformed within myself. The atmosphere, which until then had been light, began to gain a density that didn't frighten, but commanded respect, as if that moment demanded silence, not because of the absence of sound, but because of the presence of something sacred. It was at that moment that I realized that that gaze, the one that didn't smile, carried a hidden truth, a backdrop of memories I might have tried to forget, a gesture unmade, a word unspoken, a plea for forgiveness unspoken in time. It's strange to think about it now, but I felt like time there didn't follow the same logic as here. That encounter was more than a spiritual visit. It was an invitation to awareness, a subtle reminder that certain connections don't disappear simply because earthly life ends. Some continue, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And there it was, an instant, a glance, and everything changed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what that unsmiling gaze began to provoke in me wasn't just discomfort. It was a kind of internal activation, as if something, deep down, had been purposefully nudged. And the question came almost immediately, was that just a disconnected memory from the unconscious? Or was it some kind of spiritual wake-up call? The contrast between the smiles of the others and that single absence seemed too glaring to ignore. It wasn't just an aesthetic difference, it was an energetic one. While everything around radiated warmth, that figure seemed to look straight into my soul without saying a single word. But his silence spoke volumes. What if it wasn't just a reunion with loved ones, but also a summons, a call to repair something, understand something, free someone, or even myself? I began to remember moments in my life when perhaps that person had tried to show me something while alive, and I, out of pride or distraction, let it pass. It's in these kinds of moments that spirituality brings us face to face with our own unfinished business. And these aren't bureaucratic unfinished business. They're unfinished business of the soul. The hidden truth behind that look could have been related to something left unfinished between us, a conversation that never happened, a pain that wasn't embraced, a hurt that wasn't forgiven. Perhaps that presence was there, not just as a reminder, but as an invitation. Are you ready to understand now? And that's what impacts me most. Because unlike experiences that come to comfort, this one seemed to provoke inner movement. As if to say, are you ready to change the mindset with which you look at life, people, and the past? And look, when we open ourselves to this kind of reflection, things start to make sense in a different way. Not rationally, but intuitively. It's as if each memory carries a new meaning, and that changes everything. The way you see yourself, the way you understand others, the way you perceive time and even silence. Because sometimes, the deepest silence is the one that cries out for healing the most. So, if you've ever experienced something like this, or if you feel like someone is trying to tell you something, even without words, write in the comments, I'm on this journey too. We'll continue from here. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened after that encounter made it even more evident that this was no simple mental experience. It was as if an invisible door had been opened, And from that moment on, small manifestations began to emerge, each with its own symbolic weight, its own way of making itself felt. I'm not talking about something cinematic, loud, or spectacular. I'm talking about subtleties, almost imperceptible signs that for someone who has experienced something so powerful become impossible to ignore. The next night, for example, an object fell off the shelf out of nowhere. It was an old frame with a family photo, and guess who was right in the center of the image? The very person who, during the encounter, hadn't smiled. Coincidence? Maybe. But what about when, that same day, you feel a strange chill, as if someone had passed by you, without sound, without wind, without anything around to justify it? And what if, soon after, a specific scent from the past invades the room, like the perfume of someone you can't quite remember? They are fragments, traces. And if you're even remotely attentive, you'll realize that these traces have intention. It wasn't long before the dreams began as well. And the curious thing is that they didn't follow a logical narrative. They were like flashes of memories I hadn't even known were stored away. Silly details of a family lunch, a laugh, a sidelong glance, a phrase spoken without weight at the time, but which now seemed to carry new meaning. As if all of this were being reorganized, revamped within me, not as punishment, but as revelation. I believe that when the soul receives a call like this, life begins to reconfigure itself. Synchronicities increase. You hear a phrase on the street that answers exactly what you've been silently wondering. You open a book at random and read a passage that seems written for you. People reappear. Situations repeat themselves, but with a new perspective. Everything aligns so you understand, accept, and transform. It's a journey that transcends logic and enters the realm of deepest sensitivity. Because it's not about understanding with the mind, it's about listening with the heart. What came after the spiritual encounter wasn't just a continuation, it was a deepening, a sequence of signs that, together, showed me that that moment wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a new perception of presence, absence, and connection. And that's why I say, when you experience something like this, you can't go back to who you were before. Something inside you expands. Something awakens. Something moves to a more whole place, even if it remains full of questions. Because sometimes the answer isn't in logic, but in the experience of feeling. Comment below. That makes sense to me. I'd love to know if you've also noticed signs after a spiritual encounter. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because something essential changed within me after that encounter. And it wasn't just an emotional impression, it was a silent transformation that gradually spread, as if every part of my life needed to reorganize itself based on that revelation. I began to realize that the way I viewed death, absence, and even time was completely different. Before, everything was a period. Now, it became a comma, a pause, a reunion in another language. That unsmiling look, that heavy silence, that feeling of something unresolved. All of this made me reflect on the bonds we carry, even when we think we've closed cycles. I started to pay more attention to my family, truly, not just to what's being said, but to what's being silenced, to what's being repeated in behavior, to what's being avoided in Sunday conversations. I started paying more attention to the little things, and that changed everything. I had to face hidden truths. About myself, about my history, about decisions I thought were buried in the past, but they were alive, pulsing within me, influencing the way I love, forgive, and protect myself. This spiritual experience brought to light wounds I didn't even know were still raw, but it also brought a balm, a new way of embracing what hurts, without needing to understand everything, just feeling, accepting, and letting go. My relationship with faith also took on new meaning. Not a mechanical faith that repeats pre-made phrases, but a living, present faith, fueled by signs, intuitions, and synchronicities. A faith that doesn't seek control, but surrenders with trust. I began to realize that spirituality isn't out there. It pulsates in the way you listen to someone, in the care with what you say, in the respect for the stories others carry, even when they don't tell. It's in the silence you learn to sustain without judgment. It's in the forgiveness you choose to offer even without hearing a request. And when I stopped to think about the impact of it all, I realized that the true purpose of the experience wasn't to impress me with something supernatural. It was to provoke me to change, to be more whole, to live with greater awareness and presence, treating each encounter as if it were a message, each gesture as if it were a portal, and each day as if it were an invitation to repair something within myself or between myself and others that still needs light. It's not about living according to what happened, but about allowing what happened to continue living through you, in who you become afterward, in how you decide to continue the journey. And this, perhaps, is the true mission of those who receive a spiritual sign, not to keep it to themselves as a secret, but to let it overflow in small actions, in new choices, in a new vibration. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there's a question that hasn't left my head since that day. What if the one who didn't smile was expecting something from me? Sometimes we live so caught up in the rush, in the urgencies of the world outside, that we forget to look within and behind. We forget that certain presences, even silent ones, are there for a reason. That look that pierced me without a smile, without words, but with an energy that said so much. Maybe it was more than a sign. Maybe it was a request, or a memory, or even a chance to fix something that was unresolved, to forgive, to ask for forgiveness, to free someone, or myself. What if that's it? What if that heavy silence is a disguised invitation for us to have the courage to look at our own story with more love? Because in the end, what spirituality shows us, when it manifests itself in such an intimate and unexpected way, is that nothing is lost when there is love. But there are bonds that continue to demand attention, even after time seems to have moved on. And the most beautiful thing about all this is realizing that these experiences don't come to scare us. They come to transform us, to shake us out of our automatic state, to make room for something greater, something that speaks of purpose, of reconciliation, of healing, something you've perhaps also felt and kept hidden, silent, afraid of sounding crazy. But it's not. It's real. Because what touches the soul, what stirs the heart, is too real to be ignored. So if something inside you resonated with all of this, if this story awakened memories or feelings that you didn't even know were still alive, comment below. It spoke to me. Because when you share, you not only help the channel grow, you help others recognize themselves, understand that they are not alone on this journey of connection, mystery, and healing. And if you want to continue walking with us, receiving stories that touch the soul and open paths within, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It makes all the difference. And in some way, perhaps it's also a way of responding to those who, even in silence, still watch us, waiting perhaps for our next gesture.